Wizard of the Wood. Chapter 13. Apologies and Recoveries. Weightless, suspended in a frigid cold. Why did he decide this was a good idea? Why did he choose this? Was this really how it was all going to end? Here, on the face of fanged ridge far from any semblance of society, to freeze to death by the edge of the brook? His hands instinctually clutched his bag closer as the last of the fire was snuffed. His shelter, made of roots and snow, was far from warm, but it served him well until now. As the light of the fire went out, his own consciousness slipped from him. She would never know. Not now. How long had he been unconscious? He felt something. Pressure? He was numb from the cold, so it couldn't be more snow, could it? Weightless again, engulfed in unending warmth. What was going on? Was this a monster? A beast of the mountain consuming him as so many stories had warned him of? He tried to resist, but he couldn't move. His limbs refused to respond to his commands. There was one reassurance, that this was not some creature swallowing him whole. It was the gentleness of the touch. It was the familiar voice calling out his name. Reassured, Rylir felt his body instinctually turning toward the source of heat. It was solid, but there was a thrum that was soothing. Unable to resist or move on his own, he let his body go limp. Rylir opened his eyes and looked around at the vertigo-inducing ceiling far above him. He was surrounded by firs. He was laying on stone, next to a fire that could have engulfed an entire home from his perspective. It took an embarrassingly long moment for him to realize where he was. Why did this feel like deja vu? He was in Essie's home once again. Rylir blinked twice groggily and grasped at the furs around him. There he was, back by the fireplace, surrounded by the furs from his bed. The smell of roasting herbs, bubbling potions, and parchment filled the air. Rylir attempted to sit up, but his entire body revolted and sent a throbbing pain through his body. The dull ache felt like it had crawled its way into his bones, creating an untouchable cold. Breathing hurt, blinking hurt, everything hurt. But he was alive. She had come for him. Shame on you, sir. Essie's voice rang out clearly as she stepped up to him, piping a hot bowl of what smelled like soup in her hands as she sat on the ground beside him. Rylir could only gaze up into her features and, rating them quickly, was pleasantly surprised to see concern in her ice-colored eyes. Her features were set in a stoic attention, but he could tell somehow that she was just as relieved as he was that he was awake. Shame? Rylir croaked out. Yes, making me worry and being so careless with your life, stated Essie. Hardly, muttered Rylir, as he forced a partial smile onto his face. What were you doing out there? She asked, as she stirred the broth in the bowl. Why didn't you go back to the village? You could have made it back in time. I was trying to make it back. I didn't want to leave things the way they were, muttered Rylir, looking away bashfully before pulling on a smirk and looking back up at the giantess. If I didn't know better, I'd say you'd summoned that storm just to get me back here. Essie immediately leaned over him, an intimidating gleam in her features. She wasn't close enough for Rylir to touch, but it was close enough so he could see the flecks of blue in her eyes. "What makes you think I didn't?" she asked. For a moment, Rylir wondered if she was being serious. Then he spotted it. A faint smile. She leaned away before sliding her hand beneath the bundle of furs he was on so she could prop him up. Essie then took the spoon, dipped it into the broth, and blew on it twice before holding the massive spoon up to his face. "Careful, it's hot," stated Essie. Rylir winced as he forced himself forward slightly, just as she tilted the spoon. The warmth from the broth was intoxicating, as was the explosion of flavor. Swallowing hurt, but the heat of the broth warmed his core, and the chill in his bones was slowly subsiding. After he had put away one of the spoonfuls, he caught Essie's eyes and smiled sheepishly. "I guess I owe you twice now for saving my life, huh?" asked Rylir, to which Essie nodded curtly. "2 life debts. Now you shall have to endure my idiosyncrasies, assistance, and lessons without complaint," replied Essie as she dipped the spoon back into the bowl. Rylir fished his arm out from the furs, despite the throbbing ache it caused, and placed his hand on the rim of the spoon which Essie brought to him. "Essie, I'm sorry," apologized Rylir. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to continue. "I shouldn't have left the way I did. Rylir," Essie interrupted, retracting the spoon and placing it back into the bowl. She lifted Rylir in his furs higher, so they were at a better eye level, rather than her looking down on him. She had to exhale slowly before continuing, feeling suddenly nervous. I'm the one who should apologize. You were right. I hadn't considered how my actions affected you mentally. I am not proficient at considering alternative perspectives, and while I had the best intentions, I should have considered your autonomy. For that, I apologize." Rylir, completely speechless, could only manage a smile. He reached up and awkwardly scratched the back of his neck, granted with some difficulty, before clearing his throat. "Essie, I didn't mean to sound ungrateful, and I didn't mean to hurt you or pry into something that wasn't my business. I wanted to let you know that I was there for you," said Rylir, his throat rasping out his words. "You did so much for me, and I didn't want to be a burden any more than what I felt like already. I thought if I could prove my worth that you wouldn't feel like you needed to take care of me. So I guess I'm sorry too." Essie looked down and away before sighing and nodding. "I believe you, and thank you for your apology," said Essie. Her mouth felt dry as she dared herself to continue. "And I want you to believe me. I wish I knew why I had those mushrooms and why I speak in my sleep. I have always been honest with you, and I don't want you to distrust me because I do not have all of the answers. Believe me when I say I would tell you if I knew." Rylir, wincing, leaned over and gently touched Essie's hand, nodding reassuringly. "I do believe you. I also want you to know that you can talk to me if you need to. I can't do magic or the things you can do. I can listen," Rylir said. She smiled and nodded. "I will take your offer under advisement," said Essie, letting the first ever hint of vulnerability come through in her usual straightforward tone. There was a thoughtful gleam in her eye where she snapped herself out of her moment. "Until then, you need to recover." Rylir shook his head and pointed to his bag. "Not before I give you something. Consider it a peace offering of sorts," said Rylir. Essie glanced at the fireplace and carefully pinched the edge of Ryler's bag before lifting it up and handing it to him. Rylir fished around in the bag for a moment before producing 2 large, bumpy stones. "You collected rocks and hold them around in the storm?" asked Essie. "Not just normal rocks, geodes. I was going to craft them into something for you. I know you have earrings you wear from time to time, but wanted to ask you face to face," grinned Rylir. Essie wasn't sure what to say. It was such a thoughtful gesture. She looked into Ryler's eyes and nodded a few times. "Thank you. I look forward to the final product. Now, to rest," stated Essie as she laid the bundle of furs Rylir was nestled into back by the fireplace. Rylir smiled and nestled further into the furs. Just as he made himself comfortable, one question rose to Essie's mind. "Rylir, one question," stated Essie. "Why are you so curious about the mushrooms of all things?" Ryler's smile faded as he sighed and then rolled over onto his side. "The fog in the jar. I remember something like it at my home. There was a weird green-gray fog, and then all of those symptoms you listed. It was stuff that happened to my family, and to me." Essie felt a cold shiver go up her spine. Something about what Rylir said seemed familiar, but she wasn't sure how it sounded familiar. She would bring it up later, after he was rested. Until then, she tossed another log onto the fire and settled in beside Rylir. It was going to be a long night, but she didn't mind. Though she didn't say it, she was happy beyond words that Rylir was back. He was already asleep in her hands when the words finally came to her. "I'm glad you're back. I missed you." With that, she continued muttering her incantations in hopes of healing the remaining wounds and the frostbite lingering in his limbs.